Let's jump right in. You've had a chance with the book to really reflect on New York even more deeply than you did when you first transitioned from that role. What are you most proud of when you look back at your time in New York City?
I think no question, the thing I'm most proud of is the fact that we opened up some 600 new schools under Mayor Bloomberg, all schools of choice, and created options in New York. You know, when you see Brookings does a study on school choice, and New York is always right up there at the top, now perhaps eclipsed by New Orleans after Katrina, but otherwise. And to me, what we did was create options for kids that were stuck in a one-and-done situation. And the thing that I'm most proud of when you look at New York City, I have no doubt, from when we started to when Mayor Bloomberg finished, the number of good schools in that city went up really by multiples. Now, there's still a lot of schools that are not where they should be, and I don't want to overhype this. But the thing I'm most proud of is school is the unit that matters in our game. Every one of you insists on a good school for your kids. The neediest kids in America are told, go to the neighborhood school and hope they'll fix it, and maybe it'll get better. And when we saw this morning when that young woman who moved all of us almost to tears say, you know, my brother dropped out of that school, she could have been the next dropout had she not been given an option. So there's no question in my mind, Andy, that the number of good schools increased and the number of choices that parents, particularly parents in high-needs community, had changed dramatically.
So what about regrets? What would you, with the benefit of hindsight, you're a thoughtful person, what would you do differently looking back?
So Frank Sinatra says in my way, regrets I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. But if you insist, I'll sell you a few. At my age, people always want to know, what did you do wrong? And it takes 20 minutes of the conversation. We don't have enough time to discuss all the things I did wrong. I would say I had 2 or 3 regrets that are really important to me. First and foremost, something I didn't understand at the beginning but came to learn about from E.D. Hirsch, Sal Stern, and others, which really is that our kids need a very rich, deep, knowledge-based curriculum. There's too much feel-good learning, too much self-reflection going on. There's a role for that. But our kids have got to, particularly our high-needs kids who come to school with 20 or 25% the vocabulary of our middle-class kids, they have got to get domain knowledge and background. And if you haven't read it, after you finish my book, read Don Hirsch's book on cultural literacy. I got there in my 5th or 6th or 7th year. I should have gotten there a lot earlier, and that was my first regret. My second regret, which to this day bedevils me, is the disconnect between the important work we were doing and the fact that a lot of teachers, really, I was unable to get to them in a way that enabled them, unlike my principals, to understand that what we were doing is actually better for the teaching profession. That if we keep the teaching profession locked into an assembly line model, that we're going to end up paying a real price, not just for our kids, but for our teachers. And to me, the best piece I've read on this issue is Al Shanker's The Making of a Profession. He's a guy who brought collective bargaining to teaching, struck in New York, most powerful, iconic teachers union leader in our nation's history. And he was the one who said, if we don't move teaching to a real profession with real standards and self-enforcement and all the other things, recruiting the best people, having a knowledge base, if we don't do that, it's going to erode this profession and ultimately harm our public schools. We are at that point or maybe past that point. And so my inability to really bring them on side sufficiently, we could talk about why, but those two things to me are the things I wish we had done differently.
Well, those are 2 big issues that are still playing out. So let's start with standards. Where do you see the standards debate in this country going, this idea of both what kind of standards and what kind of content and curriculum you need to go with?
The governor said it this morning, and I mean, I start with a basic fact, which we all know. Most state standards before Common Core were way too lax and inadequate. 3/4 of our kids who graduated, forget the kids who didn't graduate, 3/4 of the kids who graduated are unprepared for college. Now, if anybody thinks that's a winning formula, stick with it for a while and see how long it works for you. But it's obviously ridiculous. So what happened is Common Core, what I would like to see the discussion is how do we make it better? How do we strengthen it? But we've got to move up the stack here. Now, what's happened is, unfortunately, what Bill Bennett, who was Secretary of Education under Ronald Reagan, what he said, which was true back then and is equally true now, he said, America will never have national standards. He said, the Republicans don't do national and the Democrats don't do standards. And that is really, that's what, that is, I'm not. I'll let you know when I'm trying to be funny. I'm being deadly serious about this. I am being deadly serious about this. We have a situation where we've got one nation here that's in a globally competitive race with nations all over the world. Very different world than when most of us grew up. Our kids are going to have to meet high standards. Somebody asked me in an interview earlier today, said, well, do our kids need to compete with these kids who are beating the tar out of us in other countries? And I looked at them to say, well, good, no, they don't have to compete. We can just simply lose. We can become a declining economy. We can become a place where social mobility doesn't exist, unlike when I grew up and people were talking about my physics teacher. So to me, this discussion has got to get off of politics and back onto standards. Call them what you will. Just make sure that when a kid graduates high school and we give him a certificate, we haven't lied to him. We haven't told him you've completed your high school work.
All right, so the other thing you pointed up in that is this issue of unions, and apparently by a delightful quirk
Is it a union issue?
Apparently we can all get up and just walk over and ask them because the AFT is having a meeting at the hotel as well. But in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you. So, what's the future state? I mean, you cooperated with them on some things, you accomplished some things, you also butted heads. That continues to this day. Sort of, what's the future state for unions going forward? You talked about Al Shanker's vision, but as great of a leader as he was and as influential, he didn't achieve everything that he wanted within the union in terms of that vision. So what's next?
So the first thing I would say, if you really want to read the most thoughtful stuff I've read about this stuff, it's written by Andy Rotherham. So get on Real Clear and on his website, EduWonk, and take a look, because he's doing a lot of thoughtful thinking about it. So let me, in some respects, repeat some of what he said, because I've learned about this from him. But let me back it up in the following way. Look, my first view when you run a school district is whatever you can get cooperatively, get it. So don't go in and look for fights you don't need to have. There'll be plenty of fights you need to have. Don't look for the ones you don't need to have. And I'll be the first to say, Randy and I did some good things in New York City. However, the union has a different role and a different function, and you've got to be prepared to recognize that too. So there are going to be times when I want to grow the charter sector, because I believe competition and choice will improve the whole system, not just the charter sector. When I do that, that's naturally a threat to her members, and therefore she's got to take a position on that. Now, to answer Andy's question, I think the unions are at a very interesting point, and they can either double down on an obstructionist, anti-accountability, anti-choice model, or they can kind of work constructively like they've done in various places. Contract that Randy negotiated with Michelle Rhee that Kaya is now implementing here in DC has proven to be a good contract. You have any doubt about it? Look at the results on their NAEP scores in the last NAEP that they got. So the question for the unions has got to be whether they think they can win a ground war here. My submission is no, that most Americans have actually moved in their own thinking from the fact that they used to think that the education issue was largely an issue for people of color in high poverty communities. Now they're beginning to see it as more of an American issue. And I think they're going to demand change and insist upon change. And unions got to decide whether they want to be part of that equation or whether they want to be sand in the gears of that equation. I think if they're sand in the gears, quoting you, I think they're going to become more and more obstreperous, but less and less effective. And I think if they're willing to lead their people to a new paradigm of real teaching professionalism, then I think we got a shot. And I think one of the things Randy's done that's smart is to call for a national bar exam. You just saw yesterday in New York where John King and the regents decided to up the requirements for entering the teaching profession. And it's way overdue for people to start to say that not anybody can walk into teaching and that we're going to require real rigorous admissions requirements and performance requirements. So to me, if I were in a leading position in this business, I would try to get out front of these things and move teaching to the profession. Because I think it's going to be right for teachers. It's not like there's a lot of job satisfaction for teachers right now. So the current paradigm is not working for them and not working for kids. That's a pretty good indication you better move to a new and different approach.
But it's happening slowly. People are running out of patience. We're seeing that in California with the Vergara lawsuit, which was about tenure protections and when a teacher gets tenure and how layoffs work there. And a judge has already ruled that he's thrown them out, told the legislature to fix them. That's obviously on appeal. But in the meantime, another suit similar has been filed in New York. There's discussion, a couple of suits in New York. There's discussion of suits elsewhere. I mean, you know your way around a courtroom pretty well. Before you got into in this field, you're a pretty accomplished litigator.
I thought you were going to say I was often a defendant.
So it was Weisberg was your defendant, right?
Right.
Dan was the one who always had to go to court in New York. So what do you see with these lawsuits playing out? First of all, is this a constructive way to solve this? And second, is it just an inevitable way given the lack of progress?
I think it's almost inevitable, and I'd say the following. I think from everybody's point of view, the most important thing about Vergara was when the judge said it shocked his conscience. This was a sort of ordinary judge who had no high political game to play and sat there and listened to evidence. Remember, it wasn't like he heard a 30-minute speech or something like that. He sat there day in and day out. Listen to John Dacey, who's one of my heroes, talk. Listen to Tom Kane and others come in and talk, Raj Chetty. And he sat back and he said, oh my gosh. Now, if every American could have been in that courtroom and heard what he heard, they would have all said what he said, which is this has got to stop. It's not working. Now, the courts can signal. Brown v. Board is the best example of that, but the courts can't solve. 60 years, as the governor pointed out, 60 years, 1954 to 2014 after Brown v. Board. Does anybody remotely think kids in high poverty communities get an equal educational opportunity today? It's not even, I mean, this is not like a hard question. And so the courts cannot effectuate affirmative change. What they can do, however, is bring pressure to bear on a system that, as you point out, is highly resistant to change. And that, to me, is critical. And I thank Campbell and others who are out there taking a lot of hits, because courts are things that people can't control. And you see a Vergara court come out with the kind of language it came out and the kind of remedy it's starting to talk about. And that could change the dynamics. Changing the dynamics is often a precursor to changing the politics. And in my view, changing the politics is what's essential to changing the outcomes for kids.
You said Campbell's out there, and it's like literally true. She's out right there, down in front. So another sort of fascinating dynamic, you talked about choice and expansion, and one of the things that is sort of mystifying is in New York City you have this network of schools, Success Academies, run by Eva Moskowitz, former city councilwoman. She, became very active on education there. And I mean, I see my colleagues are quick to go to Finland, quick to go to Singapore, quick to go to China, but you can also just go to Manhattan and see something that you can take a train and see something that works. What's going on in that city? Explain to us sort of what's happening in terms of her interaction with the mayor, her interaction with the school system, how you looked at it and how it's sort of evolving, and help people understand the politics of this.
No, it's what you say is so right. I mean, all of a sudden in my life, now that I have a book, I've got to be on Twitter. So let me tell you, when you're 68 years old, don't start your Twitter career. The number of people who write me back and say you forgot to put a period before the ad, as if I understand what that means, is ridiculous. So, but the one phrase that I keep using about Success Academy, which is really amazing. I mean, talk about something. She's now got close to 40 schools that are going on in New York, getting way outsized results. I mean, these schools, which are in our high needs communities, overwhelmingly African American Latino kids from high poverty communities, high free and reduced lunch. And they're getting the same results as gifted and talented programs that admit kids by tests. It's breathtaking. So you would think exactly what you say, which is, why wouldn't everybody go up there and say, what the hell are they doing? What's in the water up here at Success that's not in the water in PS 11? You would think that, but you would be wrong. And so what I tweet all the time is, let's learn and replicate, not destroy and denigrate. But that's what we're on. People want to prove it wrong, not prove it right. And that's one of the things that's most maddening about K-12 education. You know, Eva would open her doors. She would work with all these people. It's not like she's trying to hold on to the sauce. She's got, for every vacancy, 5, 6, 7 kids, families applying. It's not like she's worried about market share and she's saying, you know, I want to patent what the hell we're doing here so nobody else can develop this sauce. So she would do it. But in fact, in education, there's this huge premium on disproving that anything but the monopoly can deliver the service. And so all day long, people are trying to do studies and say, you know, she discharged some kid in the 4th grade, like we never discharge any kid in the 4th grade in the PS schools or something like this. And, you know, instead of saying, oh my gosh, let's learn to replicate. So the politics of this are exactly the wrong set of politics. And one of the reasons I'm a big choice guy is unless and until you get meaningful scale for choice, people will continue to denigrate rather than replicate. I've always said the reason Michelle was able to get the contract in DC is because the parents in DC created a charter movement long before it was fashionable, where large amounts of kids went to charter schools. And the public school was seriously worried about losing its market share, and therefore gave Michelle the kind of leverage to negotiate the contract she got. But in the absence of that, and trust me, I was a guy who ran the antitrust division for Bill Clinton, monopolists like maintaining their market share, and unless and until they realize that their market share could go because parents want something better and have those options. And the reason they block opening these new schools is precisely because if parents start to exercise their options, that's a threat to the current monopoly. And I will tell you, in New York, it's the most powerful statistic I have, but every year for the last 3-4 years, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 charter seats. And I will show a whole hell of a lot more. 15 and 20,000 charter seats, 80,000 families, mostly families of colors from high poverty communities, families of color from high poverty communities, apply for those 15 to 20,000 seats. Boy, if you're looking at a monopoly and seeing the implications of that, you understand the politics and the need for retrenchment, but it won't work. Eva proved by marching those people up to Albany and having Governor Cuomo join them. Eva proved that when you change the status quo, the new status quo has defenders, and those people would not tolerate undoing what's right for their kids. And so that's a powerful political message that's going to get heard when you create a new status quo.
But what does it say? I'm going to push you on this. What does it say about this sector, though? I mean, so Eva, she got run out politically. The U of T made her a big target, and people basically said, if you've got all these ideas about schools, go prove it. Well, she's proven it. I mean, this is, as you said, this is phenomenal. Michelle Rhee in D.C., that contract was highly controversial. It's not considered, you know, Randy says it can't be replicated. It was unique. Yet the results here are really hard to argue with. And these are third-party evaluations showing this. So what does it say? Like, you know, no pun intended, given the set of schools we're talking about in New York, but success does not beget success in this business. What does that say about the sector?
I think what it says about the sector is what I said. I think the sector is motivated by political concerns and not performance concerns. And unless and until you have a much more competitive market where people have to win children, like they have down in New Orleans right now, until you have that, the incentive to improve performance is going to be diminished, and the incentive to protect turf is going to be exacerbated, and that's the world we're living in right now. And we have got to disrupt that world. That's why it was so powerful in New York to see what happened when they tried to shut down one of the success schools, and a reaction from parents, from communities, from activists was, no, those are my kids' schools. And that flipped the politics dramatically. So what I'm saying is we have got to build constituency, create options. Everybody used to say to me, get parents more involved in their kids' education. The number one way to get a parent involved in a kid's education is give her a choice for her children, because that's what she really cares about.
So one more question. We're going to start. The mic runners are going to get up. So if you have a question in the audience, try to signal to them. I'm feeling like this is going pretty well because we've gone for about 20 minutes. I haven't had to listen to like a single New York Yankees metaphor, analogy, example, or quote from you. So
I thought you were going to say you hadn't listened to a single New York accent. I was going to say, what a great day that would be.
So one thing, and I know a lot of people in this room are interested in, is EdTech data as a disruptive force. You're interested in this as the CEO of Amplify. This has been an interesting week on this. The New York Times and all those stories they've been running about data privacy all this week, this fiasco that's unfolding at Uber, obviously against the backdrop of a lot of concern about data privacy in this sector. Where do you see that going in terms of both the disruptive potential of data in this sector and also this privacy issue and how that's going to play out?
So I think the potential is enormous, but the privacy issue is critical. And I think those of us in the education space, we have got to prioritize student data privacy. I mean, the notion that we're going to use this, like people want to use it to market and stuff like that, is ridiculous to me. And in fact, if I were a school district, I would put in place in any RFP really rigorous demands on data privacy. It should be strictly on an as-need to know during the term of the contract, with very few people with access, and only to service the school district. Now, once we get over that hump, which is an important hump to get over, then I think the power of technology to improve teaching and enhance learning is enormous. And we've got to get that going because there's so many things that could happen. Giving teachers, I'm going to give you one example, I could give you a lot, but one example in our curriculum that we developed. Every time you click on our e-reader on a word, we never take you off the page, because taking kids off the page of a complicated text they may never return. But we now know that you don't know the word diligent, or I might not know necessary, or you may not know this. And so all of a sudden, without the teacher doing a thing, we're developing an individualized vocabulary list, which is different for each kid. No teacher could do this. Second thing we do is we send each kid 6 or 7 little mini lessons on that vocabulary word. Funny things, YouTube videos, whatever, a little test here or there. And then when you use the word in the e-writer, it immediately shows up as extra points for you. All of this feeds into a system that the teacher now knows. So she knows that Rotherham was very smart, has improved his vocabulary by 480 words in the last 6 months, while Klein has only done 220 words. She knows which words, she knows how. Now there's no teacher in the world who could do this. And this is a simple little app. Multiply that by 100,000. We were having kids, had trouble getting kids to read Frederick Douglass' Life of a Slave. It's such an important book for kids to read at multiple levels, but it's a complex book and the prose is not easy to read. And so we tried different ways to engage kids. We finally hired this guy, Jackie Robinson, who played Jackie Robinson in James Brown, Chadwick Boseman, to read the first chapter. And he read it in street clothes. And it was so emotional. My wife is now reading The Life of Frederick Douglass. She got so engaged in the thing. These are the kind of things, and again, I could give you 1,000 examples. Data showing you which kids are accelerating and when to accelerate them, which kids are learning in a different kind of way and how to help them. I'll never forget the day I went to the School of One in New York. It was one of those schools I piloted and we talked about in the book. And in first two people I saw, the first one I walked up to was January 14th. It was an 8th grade math program. And I said, what are you doing? He said, oh, I'm so glad you asked, Chancellor. He said, what I'm doing is I'm now doing 9th grade math. I said, what happened? He said, well, I finished the 8th grade. So he was your first example of a competency-based learning system. I said, what happened to you last year? He said, well, last year I got so bored with my class because it was moving so slowly, I got in trouble in the school system. So I figured they must have sent a kid from, central casting for. So I walked up to somebody that they didn't direct me to. No, I'm not that stupid. I walked up to somebody they didn't direct me to, and I said to these 2 kids, they're sitting away, texting away. And I said, what are you doing? He said, oh, we're talking to our tutor. I said, where's your tutor? They said, my tutor's in Mumbai. And they're texting to a tutor in Mumbai. It costs us $8 an hour. And I said, let me ask you, is this tutor in Mumbai better than the teacher you had last year? The kid looked at me like I was an idiot. He said, are you kidding me, Chancellor? This tutor is totally focused on the 2 of us. My teacher got around to me once a month. So when you start to see the potential for what we can do if we innovate and we start to try, and that doesn't mean everything will work, but there's so much opportunity out there. And you would think, and it goes back to the question, Andy, if you don't understand the politics of this, you don't understand why we're stuck. There is not a desire to achieve, to innovate, to transform. There's a desire to protect and defend. And in a school system that's getting the results that ours is, you would think innovation would be the driving force. People just asked me what I hated most about being chancellor, and they figured it was waking up and reading 5 newspapers that beat the hell out of you every day. And I must say, I may be probably pretty insensitive after a while. I didn't like it, but it didn't drive me that crazy. What drove me crazy was to live in a bureaucracy that eschewed meritocracy and didn't want to innovate. How people get up every day and live in that world drive you nuts.
All right, let's get some questions from the audience. Can I see? There are mic runners around, so just raise your hand. Well, while they're finding their way, Joel, I'm going to ask you one.
So tell everybody, at 2:30, I'm going to be signing books downstairs. So,
okay,
and I just want to make clear like this. I told this to the governor yesterday. An autographed book is worth less on eBay, apparently, than an unautographed book. But in my heart, it's worth a hell of a lot more. So come on down and let me sign books.
It's over here.
My name is Andy Griffiths. I'm from South Florida. I would like to thank the governor for this opportunity. I went to the choice session this morning, and I wrote these things down because this is what some of the things that choice schools have, that they didn't want the same accountability that the conventional schools have. They didn't want that accountability to get in the way of maintaining their autonomy. They didn't want it to stifle their innovation. They didn't want regulatory overreach. They wanted to promote private decisions within that school. They wanted to take the test of their choice. So I ask, no one asked this question, we're out of time, so I'm asking you, Chancellor, is could we give the 90% of the kids that are in the conventional schools those same opportunities, take off the handcuffs?
I'm all for taking off the handcuffs. The basic principle which Mayor Bloomberg ran his second term on was empowerment, leadership, and accountability. But you've got to have all three. We could argue at length, and we don't have enough time to devise a perfect accountability system here. But and regulatory overreach can stifle any environment. But we need to have agreed upon measures. One of the things that was important about No Child Left Behind is it made it impossible for our nation to deny these hideous racial achievement and poverty, racial, ethnic, and poverty achievement gaps that we have. So to me, I signed a performance contract with every principal in New York City, and that was the basis on which we shut down schools, put a letter grade on them, and so forth. By the same token, once they were willing to be held to account, I was willing to increase their discretion over virtually any decision, budgeting, curriculum, and all the other things. So we've got to get the right mix of what I call that magic equation that anybody manages an organization knows. Empower your people and hold them to account. If you micromanage them, nothing good will happen. In fact, one of the things I say in the book is Michael Barber, a guy who was from London who advised Tony Blair, he said to me, you can move your system from awful to adequate through command and control, but you can't move it to good to great. And I responded, no, you can't command and control greatness. You can only unleash greatness. And we've got to understand that, because central bureaucracies that think they can manage 1,000 schools or 20 schools or 50 schools have no clue how organizations run.
All right, we have time for one more, and I'm going to have to ask, and this is a tough town to ask this, but it's going to have to be a question more very directly in the interrogative sense, not in the more Washington expository style of questioning.
Libby Zabo from Colorado. Mr. Klein, your chutzpah is contagious, and I appreciate that. My question is, a couple of years ago, New York was being touted as having these rubber rooms that teachers that weren't up to snuff were going to instead of being in the classroom. Is that still going on there? And if so, why? And if not, how did that situation get rectified?
And Joel, could you just, for the rubber rooms are not as much fun as they sound, so could you tell people what they, could you frame the question so people understand the policy that's being discussed?
No, all I could think when you said that is if you have a lot of chutzpah, you need a lot of rubber rooms. So I'll leave it at that. So the rubber room was a place, this just shows you how nuts the system was. The rubber room was a place where when we took a teacher either for misbehavior or for incompetence, usually it was for misbehavior, sexual charges, abuse of kids, whatever, it took us 2 to 3 years often to adjudicate that case, which is ridiculous. But during that time, we had to pay the teacher and we had to put them someplace. You didn't want them in the classroom. Obviously, if they'd abused the kid, you don't want to leave them in the classroom. So they created these things called rubber rooms, which people would sit in all day long and do nothing. You know, they would play blackjack or whatever they would do, read a book, and we were paying them 2, 3, sometimes 4 years. That's because the system was so broken. We've eliminated the literal rubber rooms. There's still a lot of desk jobs that people have, and the system doesn't work right. And this is a note I want to end on. This whole argument about tenure is just due process. Due process means what process is due in the circumstances. And the process in most states right now is broken and dysfunctional. What you need is a process that in 3 months or 6 months max adjudicates whether a teacher has done something or is incompetent. If she's not, let's get her back in the classroom. And if she did it, let's get her out of the system. But these processes that go on for 2 to 3 years are broken. They cost in New York, they cost us $250,000, $300,000 per teacher. It's a totally dysfunctional way to do business. And only in a system that is basically run in an irrational, bureaucratic, dysfunctional way would you tolerate it. And it's not fair to the teacher either, because after you're acquitted after 3 years, the idea that now you got to go back into the classroom doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. We've wasted 3 years of your life and 3 years of our kids' teaching time if you're a good teacher. So we've got to think differently about these things.
All right, ending on a high note.
There you go.
Please join me in thanking Joel Klein.
Thank you.
I do encourage you to get the book and to read the book. Not only is it a first-hand account of a really important episode, it gives a really terrific insight into somebody who John very aptly described in the introduction. So if you want to just get a copy at Amazon and not get it signed and preserve the value, that's fine. That's fine too. But I would certainly encourage you to read it and hopefully have a chance to engage with Joel during the rest of the day.
Let me say
here.
one thing that John said, though, that I really, before Patricia, it's people like John White who are doing the work right now, and so many other people out there that really made me so proud of what happened in New York, because it became a place where we developed a passion for changing the nation. And if you study what John has done and others are doing out there right now, what you realize is these are some of our most capable leaders in America who are spending all their time fighting really hard. And I just want to salute one guy who's hope he's here, who just finished up and about to finish up in Tennessee, Kevin Huffman, who, like John White, is one of my heroes and a really great man. Yeah. Carson McCulloch wrote a book called The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, and I thought she always had in mind superintendents and state commissioners, because it's a very lonely job. Those people are out there busting their hump for our kids, and they need not only our support and our respect, but they need us on the line, cheek by jowl, fighting with them in order to transform these systems that, as Andy pointed out, are so resistant to transformation.
Well, that is ending on a high note. Thank you very much. Joel Klein.
Thank you.